Hello, are you a woman looking to level up in your career? Well, this show is for you. Invite you to join us and take control of your career. Today, we are joined by Cathy Fraser. She is the Chief HR Officer at the Mayo Clinic, and she's also a board member at Lori's Gifts and on several nonprofit boards as well. Cathy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Super excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's start by just getting to know you a little bit better. So you have had a non-traditional career path for a head of HR. Tell us how you found your way from consulting into Chief Human Resources Officer.
Well, I would love to tell you, as I would advise others, that there's a very planful approach of how one creates their career. But I'd give myself a unplanned lattice career kind of approach. I have been in all kinds of industries. I have been in auto, retail consumer, and healthcare. I've actually worked in finance, marketing strategy, and now HR. And I've been in terrific organizations like General Motors, American Airlines, McKinsey & Company, where I did my consulting work, Tenet Healthcare, and Mayo Clinic. So basically can say I'm super old. I've also been actually one of my most kind of interesting parts around my lattice career, one may say, is being a small business owner. So for about 6 years, we owned a little healthy marketplace that I did as somewhat of a hobby alongside of these other corporate roles. And I would tell you it was the hardest job I ever did and probably one of the most biggest personal learnings in terms of stretching one to their capabilities. So I talk about all that because it does lead you to the place of where do you end up, and that your journey could mean a lot of different things. It may not always lead it to the perfect kind of project plan. I'm going to be the head of HR for Mayo Clinic. But I will say that there are many things that fit so perfectly for me. First of all, healthcare is an incredibly interesting and altruistic industry. People that go into that industry, and if you've got that heart to help others, it is a perfect place. And you don't need to be a clinician to do it. You don't have to be a doctor or a nurse. And a lot of people think that, particularly those that are, younger stage, high school students, middle school, thinks it's clinical. But there's a ton of work that you can do to advance the science of healthcare and the business of healthcare. And that really does fit me well. So very altruistic. HR is really cool too, because it's a super interesting function. It brings all those experiences that I've had kind of to bear, because HR is really kind of employee sales and marketing. It's about having to deal with, human capital, and unlike a widget, there's many different derivatives of what drives human capital, right? It includes some analytics, compliance, strategy, partnerships. And I always view it as being almost more of a business than it is a function. And then it's also very evolving. So I remember, again, this is showing perhaps many, many years ago, that in the 80s, there was a Fast Company article that said, why everybody hates HR. And I remember it because I was in finance at the point, like totally agreed with it, right? Now I see that the HR discipline, it's so much different than it has been. It's really grown. So if you want to be in an area that's innovative, that's leading, who's thinking about how you actually motivate, influence, and work with people, it is a terrific place to be. And then Mayo makes it super easy for me because at least my strong view is that Mayo Clinic is just an amazing organization. It is a place where it allows people to bring their lives and do amazing things for others. And it's a values aligned organization. So one of the best compliments actually I got when I was at Mayo, after having a long career, someone said, "Oh, well, you're so human." Now that could be considered a total insult as well, but very human. And that's because, you're bringing your life as a career person, but also as a mom, a sister, a child, a spouse, a friend. You bring all of that, and organizations like Mayo Clinic really do look at that whole person and actually really creates that to be a part of someone's career. So.
I love how you're talking about that values alignment. That's something that I talk about with a lot of the women that we work with in our career coaching, where it's so important to make sure that you're not only looking at what you're doing, but making sure that the organization you're working with is aligned with who you are, so you can bring your whole self to work.
No, I agree. I mean, that's actually, so when I give job advice to people, one of the biggest things I'll say is don't look for a job. Look for a career or an organization that actually has good synergies with who you are as a person. Because an employer nor you should be interested in what can I do for the next kind of couple of years to actually make a paycheck. It is around how you could have impact, and impact is actually aligned if you're not having to push things uphill. If you've got an organization whose values create the tailwinds, but which you can bring your best, can motivate the most, not only will the organization get the best from you, but you will have that fulfillment, that joy, that sense of purpose that, many kind of situations where you're not fit well within the values organization or the context of what you're doing, it can just be a kind of a tough thing to get up every morning to kind of do it, right? And that should not be the goal.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I couldn't have said it any better. So you also talked about just how innovation is key in the HR space, and the world of work is really changing so much right now, especially in the last year. So what are the characteristics that you see for successful female executives, let's say 5-10 years from now?
So first I'll explain a little bit about me in that I have a 17-year-old daughter. So I am actually kind of projecting where I want her to be in 5 or 10 years. And she will actually be in the workforce. She will not be someone staying at home. I am positive of that. So when I think about the characteristics, the next 5 or 10 years, it really is, first I'd say, females in the workplace and in top and emerging roles, not because of compliance, not because of mandates, not because California says you must have X number of people on board, these kind of things. It's going to be because of pure competitive capitalism, which is saying, organizations will absolutely see and ingest the fact that having more perspective, it makes sense for actually businesses to actually be successful. I don't think we're gonna have to tell everybody that fact that, greater diversity, particularly gender diversity, creates kind of greater performance. It will simply be apparent. And so, it won't be a conversation. Hopefully it'll just be is. I do think there's going to be a little less on formal education. So all those folks that think I need to get my master's and my doctorates, et cetera, I still think that there's a place for that. But in many cases, it's going to have less formal education, more certificates, more skills, more life experiences, which gets me to my kind of third point where I think the world's going is the women particularly will be experts of many disciplines. So as I said in my life, and maybe I was a little bit ahead of my time, but I went into finance and strategy, et cetera. But I do think that this concept of saying women perhaps moreover have this learning agility to go into other circumstances and learn. And the more we are experts of many disciplines and having some level of digital capabilities, it will allow us to actually lean in more in different areas. It's going to be looking beyond kind of any task or any process, but looking at experiences. And again, with many kind of experiences or expertise, you can, as a woman particularly, can see what that experience is and be able to help define it, shape it, and influence to it. I also think that women are going to be really important as far as kind of leading, setting a very high bar. So this is not just following and leaning in, but it's setting the bar for things like team building and enablers. I think that the worlds of work is going to move much more to communities versus just pure teams. And I think women particularly are good at creating those informal and formal networks because we're curious. We want to actually have relationships. We see the benefits of multidisciplinary teams, et cetera. And I think that the high bar that women will set will be in these teams and enablement. They'll also lead the path on flexibility. I think that, we say this sometimes as a kind of, this employer will allow you to have flexibility, right? But it's going to be expected from a consumer perspective. We will lead the way on having more flexibility of working where we want, what we want to work with, the teams we are working with, and how we work. And I think women will be leading that because of our desire to actually ask the questions and not necessarily bend to kind of the corporate norms. So those are kind of predictions for my daughter and for the future.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there about women leading the way with some of those pieces on the flexibility, in some ways, it's kind of like what we've talked about, how over the years, millennials want these things. Well, guess what? Everybody wants these things. And same kind of thing, women are going to demand them. And at the end of the day, the men in the organizations are going to benefit as well.
Yeah. And I think actually, you're seeing this, that, men and female and women are becoming more common, in terms of what they want out of life. So it's not just women kind of leading the way, but there's actually leading it, to your point, for everybody. But I think that is really important.
Yeah, and there are so many, I think the number is almost 50% now, where the women are the breadwinners in the organization, in the family. So you can't necessarily just expect that the man is going to be the primary earner in the couple.
Yep.
So you also mentioned about just that focus on lifelong learning as part of the career journey. So how do you think about lifelong learning as you build your career, especially since the traditional kinds of education is going to become less valuable in your perspective?
Yeah. So, I'll give you some personal perspectives. I'm not a researcher on this space, and there's probably great science out there. But, I'll first of all say that at least for my lifelong learning, it's partially because I'm an overachiever, and I totally blame this on my mother. So you can blame everything your mom. My daughter blames everything about her tendencies on me. But I think first but that concept of being not just I say an overachiever and just, it is really that being curious, right? It's got to start with your ability to be curious, intellectually curious, but it goes more than that. It's actually being not an admirer of curiosity, it becomes an activist of curiosity. So when I look at some of the things that I've done in my career, I've jumped in. Again, I wouldn't say this is right for everybody, but I do think it's good to actually say, what's fun? How do I play? And I've always found that when I'm passionate about something and I pursue it, I find out whether I love it or I don't, it actually grows me. So I'll give you a couple examples of my career, but then I'll give you some more recent COVID-19 kind of examples. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, terrific area, tree hugger, all that, University of Washington, all that. But I was the first in our family to move to Detroit. Now, someone might say, gosh, you went from Seattle to Detroit, and this is back in the 80s. It's like, you got to be kidding me. But it was something where I jumped on because it was this great opportunity. I was fresh out of college, and man, what an opportunity to kind of take a corporate role. That was a big move for me. And that was pretty much just saying, I'm curious. And you know what? I'm actually willing to activate. I jumped from a corporate role to consulting, kind of earlier career, but it wasn't, I had a great career path going in one area, and I decided to kind of take a significant shift, a significant comp change, all the rest of it, and go into consulting. I went from for-profit to nonprofit, most recently going from Tenet Healthcare to Mayo, really big changes, but yet I thought it was the right thing to do. So I learned, and every one of those moves, I've been curious and I've activated. If I was to use more of the COVID-19 kind of example, so more close in, I'm not changing jobs and things like that, but I am trying to figure out, what do I do in this very different world of, you're socially at home, you're locked in, whatever. So I'll give you a positive example is macrons. I am intellectually curious about why macrons take so hard, why they're so hard to make. I have made dozens and dozens of macrons, and I am just at the cusp of actually perfecting a perfect French macron, right? Now, that's something that's intellectually interesting. I didn't just read the menus. I didn't just read and go to a bakery. I've spent time invested on perfecting this thing. And I have every belief that once I perfect it, I will never make another one again. But I have learned a ton. I'll give you a different example, though, which is puzzles. Everybody says, gosh, Cathy, puzzles are a great way to learn. It gives you kind of it's good resiliency, these kind of things. So I bought all these puzzles, and it was horrible. I can't stand doing puzzles. It's awful, but I tried. I knew it was supposed to be good. So what did I do? I started creating puzzle parties. So I now have people that come over when we're not COVID, but I did it pre-COVID, where I'd have maybe about 10, 11 people come over to my house, and we would have a puzzle, 300, 500 piece. We drink wine and do puzzles. So still kind of being curious about puzzles. Why is it so interesting? And it's fascinating the number of people that love puzzles and love the prop of a puzzle to have a great social reason to get together. So I'd say that kind of learning, it's about everything you look at. Is it curious? Or first of all, too, does it spark your interest? But more importantly, can you activate to it? Can you do something about it? So.
Yeah, well, and I love how you were kind of talking about some of the big jumps that you've made in your career. And like you said, some of these things you're going to find that you love, and others you might not, and you learn. But that's one of the things that I say in the career process. Obviously, the more intentional you can be, the better. But no decision has to be forever. So almost any decision can be reversed, and you can do something else later once you learn.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I also agree that, particularly as it relates to careers, there's no employer that is interested in you not playing your hand out fully. So if you're not happy with what you're doing, the very best jobs I've had, and I influence others to do this as well, is to shape your next adventure within that organization. And I've done that at almost every place I've been, whether it's, I have a huge love for environmental sustainability. Let's actually build an environmental capability within the organization, maybe through affinity first in affinity groups of interest, and then later into a true full-blown office. I've looked into education and learning in the past because it's something I'm personally interested in, and extended HR to areas that were of interest. And I'd say that for people to really think about, who has challenged you to think about what you love, and can you parlay that love and that passion, someone influencing you to kind of think about how might you use that to shape your current career versus jumping and actually having to kind of do a restart. So
yeah, absolutely. And even for the things that you don't love, what can you learn from it? So speaking of COVID, like you did a minute ago, tell us how you take care of yourself while you're on this career journey, or, like you were talking about in the days of COVID.
So I will tell you that I am an absolute work in progress. So my self-care, in part, it is probably trying to be reflective, but I am I'd say I work a ton. I love to work though. So there's also a bit of personal forgiveness and family forgiveness because they see me happy with what I'm doing. So there is this kind of little bit of taking care of myself, shouldn't necessarily resemble either, but I am actually okay with the fact I like to work. My family understands it. And therefore there's a bit of forgiveness on that. But I'd also say this, which is attitude. Part of taking care of yourself is not to be, woe is me, I'm a victim of, this is a survivor issue. It's around, is there lemonade within lemons? And so I have a saying that I oftentimes refer to, and it gets people kind of in this different headset, which is the most memorable moments are not necessarily your happiest, right? So can you create terrific memories in COVID-19? What were those things that were memorable that you thought, and I'm not saying it has to be horrific, but were there things that you pivoted and it challenged you to do things you've never had to do before? And how do you kind of take that as a part of who you are as life? In this situation with COVID, I've also had a situation where I've had to drive tremendous amount between Dallas, Texas and Rochester multiple times. Someone would say, oh, that's horrible. You're driving 13 hours, it's full days. That sounds terrible. But you know what? It was a great way for me to catch up with audiobooks. It was a great way to have some reflection. I got to know every rest station in Kansas City, right? So there's this attitude view, which is how do you take what you're doing, whether it's in personal life or work life, and say, let me lens this in a way that actually is good. And then when you take care of yourself, you're able to kind of see that optimism and what you're, how that fits with an attitude. So, I think well-being, sometimes people think about it as being physical, like I'm going to go jog or I'm going to go ride my bike. Sometimes it's just kind of having that attitude that's saying my well-being is around optimism. It's about an exhilaration. It's around that I'm making a difference. You just have to get comfortable with those are the things that kind of motivate you.
Wow, I love what you're saying there, because I believe that wholeheartedly about how important mindset is to what happens to you. I mean, what's the saying where, 50% or 10% is what actually happens to you and 90% is how you think about it. Wow. And you can turn almost any situation into something that you're going to learn, grow from, benefit from. There's so much out there.
I think it is being very deliberate about it, though, because if you don't check yourself, it is really easy to kind of wallow in, this is crummy, this is hard. So, whatever your trick is, whether it's having someone you chat with to say, hey, tell me about the best thing that happened today, or if it is, a coach coming and actually asking you to really take accountability for your actions and, the positivity of it, whatever that mechanism you do, it's really important to be deliberate, because I do think it is easy to get so swayed by media and by Facebook and other things that can really drag you down. You've got to have that kind of other part to balance the positivity.
Yeah, and it's a choice. Mm-hmm. So so tell me, if we were to switch into some women in leadership initiatives here, what pitfalls do you see women making in their careers that men don't fall victim to as much? And is there anything that you would suggest women do to avoid these traps?
Yeah. So I think there are, again, very studied, very scholarly people have looked at this, but, I have seen the behaviors like questioning one's own capabilities, self-deprecating around like, I know I'm stupid, but let me actually give you this idea. And I've seen those kind of those type of behaviors that oftentimes getting someone to call them out, I think is really important because you kind of have to own them. If you don't know about it, it's hard to own. I do see the pitfalls sometimes that women don't leverage their outsiders as much. They don't rely necessarily on their network for EQ issues, whether it's having friends or professional associations that are not necessarily in your work group, but people that you can actually talk to, or really people around you that might be able to give you that objective perspective. My sister is amazing. She can't fire me as her sister. And she is the single person that always tells me the truth. She'll like, that's ridiculous, Cathy. You did that wrong. Like, oh, well, no one else told me that. And do you have that truth teller, that person that really is just in it for you and you can trust that? And I think the activision is, I do see getting a little bit to our point about recreating your own career if you're not happy. I see women oftentimes just exiting versus actually kind of asking, saying, well, I'm not particularly happy here. I'd like to do this. And having that assertiveness to be able to say, I'm going to ask you for what I want and what I think I'm doing well. And I think the reception that people will give you, if you were to make those asks, maybe encouraged by someone else to kind of focus you on that, you might see some really positive outcomes. That said, I'd also say, if those are pitfalls, in my optimistic way, I'd say, what are the strengths? What do women, how can we play to our strengths versus just avoid pitfalls? And here are 3 things that I would say are going to be really helpful for people that I've seen people do. I occasionally do them, again, a work in progress here. But I do think if you're in a meeting or in a call or something where you are a minority of less females around the room, whatnot, I think you can absolutely say, let me give you a woman's perspective at that, right? It's not just the facts that women make most of the buying decisions. I guess you can always kind of revert to the fact base, but people should care about what a woman's perspective is. And I think you can call it out, somewhat inferring the fact that there may not be a woman's perspective on the table at that point. I think, again, in our discussion earlier around multidisciplinary teams, I think that women do a tremendous job at bringing people that are not usually together. We are not silo builders necessarily. We're actually community builders. How are you activating to say, let me reach across to my finance and my marketing and my public affairs to bring a team together to solve a problem? And that is an absolute strength by which women do so well. And actually, I can't candidly say that men should follow more often. And I do think, lastly, I think women can do an amazing job innovating, where I think that fear of failure actually is more resonant within perhaps men that have gotten their kind of, this is what I do well, this is what I know. I think women have a unique opportunity, if they activate, to innovate with the possibilities of doing amazing things. And you see that from many women entrepreneurs that go right out there to be able to say, you know what, if I fail, I fail, but it'll be a learning opportunity. It's really important that I activate.
I love that. So speaking of activation, there's a lot of people out there in the job market right now, or people that are considering a switch. So as an executive who is highly involved in the hiring of other executive talent, what differentiates the best candidates in your mind? And give us some actionable thoughts on that.
I'm a former consultant, so everything comes in 3. So sorry about that. And if I did only have 2, I will make the 3rd one up. So you might want to discount the 3rd. So I'm just saying. But first of all, energy and passion. My number 1, someone that comes in has all the right answers, but doesn't have the heart. They may have been great studied, but how are they going to inspire people? How are they going to create a contagion that's going to get people to be excited, right? That gets to that little 90-10 that we were talked about before. It's kind of how do you perceive and how do you influence? So I always look for people that have energy and passion. I really love it if they've done their homework enough, where they've said, in the people area, oftentimes it's, you know what, I've actually gone to one of your hospitals and experienced it, and here's what I think, right? So how have they gotten some distinct insights, and perhaps not just the traditional way, to demonstrate that they have energy and they have passion? So that's kind of really important. I do think bringing unique insights out to be able to say, I'm not really as familiar with your business, but I am taking an experience I used here in baseball and bringing it to this job, and here's how I think about it. Anyone that can spark an idea or show that you're innovating is going to be someone who's going to be kind of more about the possibilities, and maybe a little riskier or higher, but a high reward kind of hire. And lastly, I'd say distinctiveness. I always want to come away from an interview and say, did I learn anything? And if I'm talking to 20 people and I've learned nothing, I'd say, how's this person going to add anything to the team? So I always would love you to come through and say, what can I teach this person that they may not know? Maybe it's not just about me, but how do I help them advance their thinking? And candidly, those people that actually can spark my imagination, can get me to think in a different way that I haven't, they're always going to be winners, at least in my book, in terms of people that take roles.
I love that advice. I think it's so on point, and not only great for people who are looking for a job, but people who are looking to excel in their career in general. So I think you can take that exact same advice and apply it to people climbing the ladder as well. So Cathy, thank you so much. You've given us so many great insights as a part of this conversation today. I am appreciative of you joining us and look forward to staying connected on LinkedIn and other platforms as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. This has been fun.
All right. Take care.